in the sight of God. We don't say the same. They're not, evidently they're not the same. I mean, in the Western world, we are led to think that they are the same, and some men and women are undergoing operations to become the same. But they are not the same. The male and the female are not the same psychologically, they're not the same physiologically, and they don't have the same social roles. But they are equal in the sight of God. Then God goes on to say, fear Allah by whom you demand from each other your rights. So God says, be mindful of his legislation and his justice, by whom you demand your rights. What kind of rights? Marital rights, here it means. My rights as a husband doesn't originate from me. And my wife's rights as a woman, as a female, or as a wife, doesn't originate from herself. I'm not the one that gives her her rights. She's not the one that gives me my rights. The one that gives both of us our rights is the legislation of God. But then God says on top of that, for us men, to give reverence to the wombs that gave you life. Who is the wombs that gave us life? Our mothers. And if we reverence our mothers, we have to reverence our sisters. If we reverence our sisters, we have to reverence our wives and our daughters, because all of them inevitably will be mothers. The other thing is that Allah, peace and blessing, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has ordered for us and outlined for us all the rights of inheritance, the rights of treatment, the rights of worship, the specific roles. God says in the Quran, "Ar-rijalu qawwamuna 'ala an-nisa." Men are the maintainers, the protectors of women. What this basically means is that in Islam, the woman doesn't have to work. She doesn't have to earn a living for herself. She doesn't have to. The husband cannot order her to wash the dishes, wash the clothes, iron his clothes, fix his food. He can't order her to do anything. But God has ordered him, on the contrary, to maintain her. And she doesn't have to work at all. Because God said, "Ar-rijalu qawwamuna 'ala an-nisa." But God has given to the women one of the gravest tasks. One is one they cannot avoid, unless they take their uterus out, and that is having children. That is the task that God has given to women, to bear children. Now that doesn't mean that is their only task, but that is a task they cannot avoid. And that task of having children, men certainly couldn't do it, even if they wanted to. If a man tried to have a child, he would die. And if he did have a child, psychologically, he would never be able to deal with children the way that women do. But God has given the women the capacity to have children, to take care of those children, and in many cases, take care of their husband, themselves, and other people's children, because they have the psychological capacity to do that. This is the gift that God gave to women. To be what? To be the hands that rock the cradle of civilization. All prophets had mothers. And all prophets were children at one time, and they were nurtured by their mothers. So in Islam, the position of a woman is that of sensitivity, one of sanctity. Now, if there are Muslims who don't respect women because of their culture, whether it's Arab culture, whether it is Asian culture, whether it is African culture, or there is American culture, any other culture, that is not an indictment against Islam. That's an indictment against those Arabs or those Africans or those Asians or those who disrespect women. But let's bring this issue up. Let me bring up this issue. As a sociologist, because my academic background is that, as a sociologist, there are a few statistics I want to share with you relative to the treatment of women. Now, you know, in the Western civilization, you know, we're always talking about how sophisticated we are, how principled we are, how educated we are, how civilized that we are, and therefore we want to go throughout the world straightening out everybody else's human injustices. But let's talk about the injustice. I'm going to give you a few statistics that might suggest that in Western civilization, there's a few fires that need to be put out before people start going other places putting out fires. Between the USA and the UK, I don't have the statistics for Australia, but I'm sure they would also be interesting to know. There are, between the USA and the UK, 357,000 legal abortions every year. This means individuals who chose, in most cases, of course in some extraordinary cases it might have resulted, a pregnancy might have came through rape, because that's another statistic I'm going to share with you. But in most cases, pregnancy that occurred as a result of the choice of two individuals who afterwards decided, maybe one of them decided, but decided afterwards they didn't want that child. So they aborted that child, and today, over 357,000 unwanted children are aborted anywhere between the 4th week and the 8th week of pregnancy. And those are children, those are human beings. We know now from an embryological study that those are human beings. Yet they are killed and they are murdered because the human beings who entered this relationship decided that they don't want that responsibility, so they kill it so that they don't have to face that responsibility. That is an indecency. That is an immorality. That is a great oppression, not only against women, but against those children. And what kind of a psychology does that create for women who have, in the West, most women before they are 30 years old in the Western Hemisphere, they said that 3 out of 10 women between the USA and the UK, 3 out of 10 have at least 2 abortions before they're 30 years old. The other thing is, the Western countries that claim to be the champions of social justice and the freedom and liberation of women, they are the ones who promote and license 24 million women who prostitute themselves. Can you imagine that? 24 million women between the USA and the UK who have licenses to prostitute. Another 83 million that dance in nightclubs naked for men who just go there for their enjoyment. Does that sound like a civilized place? Does that sound like a civilized society? Does that sound like a society that has in their hearts the humanity for women? Every 39 seconds in America and the UK, every 39 seconds, a woman is raped, forcibly raped. 7 out of 10 of those rapes are never investigated. 4 out of 10 never even reported. Now I ask, when you think about the so-called inhumanity towards women in Afghanistan, and the inhumanity towards women in Saudi Arabia, and the inhumanity towards women in India or Africa or Somalia or wherever else that we want to liberate these women from, do these same statistics exist? Absolutely not.
I would argue, I've come back from Morocco recently, the level of prostitution in Morocco by several people I spoke to, was like running at 80% of young women are prostitutes.
Yeah, I will agree with you, I will agree with you when it comes to Morocco, but I didn't name Morocco.